I did not have a cup of coffee until I was about 23 because I thought that if I drank coffee, God would not let me through the pearly gates. On top of coffee, I also thought it was bad to have tea. I thought I should never use face cards because those were against God's law as well. And I also covenanted in a holy temple that I would avoid loud laughter. Hi, my name is Alyssa Grenfell. I am an ex-Mormon author and content creator, and welcome to today's video all about the rules that I was expected to follow as a member of the Mormon Church. While I'm sure it's fairly common for people to be used to something like the Ten Commandments within Christianity, Mormonism has so many other little rules that it's almost hard to quantify all of them in a single video. The most comprehensive list I could find online I will link below, and it had 613 different rules that members of the church are expected to follow. I think this video will really show how much Mormonism really focuses on black and white thinking. There's not a lot of nuance, especially in the way that I was raised. For example, one of my favorite stories is when I was a teacher in the MTC, and as missionaries, Mormon missionaries, the men are not allowed to roll up their white sleeves. So some men might, roll their sleeves up so that they're at the elbow. And in Mormonism, I feel like the stereotype is that this gives you a bit of a bad boy look, but missionaries are not allowed to roll up their sleeves. They can either wear short sleeve white shirts or they have to have their sleeves all the way buttoned at the cuff. And so when I was at the MTC, we had this big meeting about dress and appearance. And one of the elders had his sleeves rolled up, and he got called out during the meeting as someone who was breaking the dress and appearance standard. And he stood up, and the elder actually basically said, "I don't see why it's that big of a deal. I'm still wearing the white shirt. This is still to me something that should be okay." And the teacher got a little flustered because missionaries don't often talk back. And the missionary teacher said, "Well, remember that we are emissaries of the Savior and we are here to represent him. And so I think that we should dress exactly as the Savior dressed." Keep in mind, this is how the Savior dressed. The Savior did not historically wear a white shirt with a collar. He wore a robe, I guess. That's how he's usually depicted. Wasn't there myself, can't tell you for sure. But I just feel like that's one little bit of an example of a time when there's a rule, don't roll up your sleeves. And it's not just, hey, that's against the code, but it's brought back to the literal Son of God as the reason to why God doesn't want you to have your sleeves rolled up halfway. That the most powerful, omnipotent being, in the entire universe deeply cares about how your sleeve is rolled or not as a young man. I also wanted to show a short clip of a video I was shown often as a young adult. This is a video that is meant to teach about chastity. The reason I wanted to show this video is not just because of what it teaches about chastity, but also the underlying principle that really pervades all of Mormonism. Here's the video and then I'll explain.
Teenagers sometimes wonder. They always tell us we shouldn't become sexually involved, but they never tell us the limits. What are the limits? The problem with this question is that some people think if they can identify certain limits, that they can still get as close to those limits as possible and still be okay. But like floating down a river without knowing about a waterfall ahead, trying to get close to the limits is not a very smart idea.
So the video presents this example, right? The example of the waterfall. And the waterfall is presented as the rule. And with the law of chastity, they want to figure out what is the line? Because I don't want to cross the line. I don't want to go too far and disappoint God, but I would like to date. I would like to prepare to marry someone. What physically am I allowed to do and not? You want a line. So they're saying, even if the line does exist, which we'll talk about the line in a bit, you should be so far away from that line that there is not even a danger of you falling over the edge. An example of this is growing up, we didn't even call our coffee table a coffee table. We called it the living room table because there's a sense of not even wanting to approach the appearance of evil, not even wanting to get close to falling off the edge of the waterfall. This type of thinking, while I suppose somewhat makes sense because, it's hard to, some of these lines are fuzzy. It's hard to define the exact line of chastity. However, I think it also creates a mindset in which you are so afraid of sin that you will stand 10 to 20 steps back away from the sin in order to ensure that you are going to be saved, that you're still a good Mormon, that you're still a good person. And so I wanted to start this video with explaining that mindset, because understanding that it's not just about the rule, but that it's staying as far back from the rule as possible is kind of fundamental to Mormon theology, doctrine, policy, whatever you want to call it. If you are considering joining the Mormon Church, which from comments, I think a lot of people who come to my videos are doing more research before they choose to join, I do think you should watch this entire video, because I believe a lot of joining the Mormon Church is that they conceal information, so you don't join the organization with sufficient informed consent. So they don't, for example, tell you about the temple. If you'd like to learn more about what happens in the temple, please watch my video. However, it's not even just the temple. This laundry list of rules, 613 from that one list, more probably if someone really sat down and thought about it. These are the standards that you will be held accountable to, but not just you, your children, their children. If you are joining this organization, the list of expectations is so incredibly long that I think you should at least know what they are if you're going to choose to join and begin begin giving 10% of your income to this church. Final quick disclaimer, as I already kind of prefaced with that video, this specific video will discuss some more adult topics like substance use and sexuality, sex. So before we continue, please just be aware that those are topics discussed in this video. Let's start with coffee, because I think that's the entry point into Mormon rule mania that a lot of people are the most familiar with, and the one that probably makes the least sense. So Mormons follow a health code called the Word of Wisdom. That's what it's referred to within the faith. And this was a scripture essentially given to Joseph Smith back when he was organizing the church. And it was meant to be a health code given to the saints for them to follow. Over time, it has morphed quite a bit. People didn't used to take the Word of Wisdom quite as seriously as they do now. For example, it used to be that they didn't ask about the Word of Wisdom when you got your temple recommend. So it was more of a suggestion than a hard and fast rule. But once they made it so that you had to follow these rules to enter the temple, people started taking it much more seriously. The health code prohibits a lot of different substances. And I think, you can't have alcohol. So I didn't have any alcohol till I was 23, 24-ish. And that, to me, I think most people understand, abstinence from alcohol, probably pretty good for your liver, right? The same thing goes for all other substances, tobacco, vaping, weed, that kind of a thing. All of that is off limits. Coffee is also on the list. And the most common question I get with coffee is, like, why? And people usually say, oh, it must be because of the caffeine, right? Caffeine makes you jittery. It's a little addictive. It's not very good for you. So it's because of the caffeine, right? No, it actually isn't. Because Mormons do love their Monster Energy drinks, their Red Bulls. Caffeine is, even Dr. Pepper, Coke, Diet Coke, those are all well loved within the Mormon community. So it is not about caffeine. It's also not, about sugar. Most of those drinks I just listed are really sugary. Coffee, you can take black and it's not as much sugar, obviously, as a Red Bull. But the reason coffee is prohibited is just the coffee itself. Nothing more. So, and the same goes with anything with the word coffee in it. So coffee cake, I wouldn't have growing up. If you have some sort of like coffee candy, you're not going to have that. So it's really just if it has the word coffee. And it's nothing about the coffee in particular if you really drill down into the rule. And even on my mission, that was one of my biggest difficulties, is trying to get people to stop drinking coffee, because people don't get why they have to do it. And people love coffee. I love coffee. It makes sense why people don't want to get rid of it unless they have a good explanation. And essentially, the way that my mission taught us to explain it to people who wanted to join the church is God sometimes gives us rules that we don't understand to test our faith and to show that we're willing to follow him. And so this is a rule that almost exists purely to prove you can follow rules. That's how it was presented to me on my mission. Some people will say, oh, well, there's this one study this one time that showed, coffee is bad for you in this way or this and that. So people do try to kind of explain it away. But certainly there's never been any compelling enough evidence that a doctor, doctors everywhere start saying, don't drink coffee anymore. Coffee, alcohol was illegal during Prohibition, and coffee has never been illegal because there just is not enough proof it's bad for you. Mormons are also not allowed to have tea, but they are allowed to have herbal tea. So the tea conversation is another one that's kind of funny because the tea is kind of based on the caffeine content. It's basically if it's brewed. So black tea is not allowed, chai is not allowed. But if you had an herbal lemon ginger tea, that would be allowed. So it's not just, in the Word of Wisdom, it says it's about hot drinks, but you can have hot drinks. You can't have iced coffee. As much as the human brain wants some logical reasoning behind this rule, it just honestly doesn't really exist. So it's just about rule following. I did mention drinking. Drinking is completely off limits. No, my family, we would not even have food that was made with alcohol. So if there was cooking wine used, we wouldn't eat that. I also think there's an element of avoiding evil, avoiding the appearance of evil. I would not go into a bar when I was Mormon. I remember my husband once picked up some wine for his mom, who has not been Mormon since she was 20. And she asked him to go grocery shopping and pick up some wine. And I got so upset at him when I think we were still dating at that point, because I felt like he had sinned essentially by purchasing the wine, because that is me on the waterfall, right? You're not drinking it. I'm not even mad. It's not like I'm mad at you that you drink it. I'm mad that you even purchased it. So we have this line, but we're also avoiding even appearing to be close to the line. And that was one of our first disagreements, was me, getting upset that he would help his mom out by buying a bottle of wine. If you dig in enough to the Word of Wisdom, there are other aspects, like it says to eat meat sparingly. It says to eat fruits and veggies in their season. There are other aspects which are other kind of pretty good advice for health, but Mormons don't really focus on that stuff nearly as much as they focus on the substances. It's not like if you talk to a Mormon, they'll have similar strength of feelings about eating meat sparingly and not drinking coffee. One is definitely more focused on when it comes to the Word of Wisdom than the other. Next, I wanted to discuss the rules around dating and marriage. But before I do, I wanted to explain a little bit about how the rules have changed over time. I mentioned it some with the Word of Wisdom and how it has become more front and center within church culture. As the church has grown over time, a lot of the rules have kind of fundamentally changed. There's a pamphlet that I was given as a youth called the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. And they've released several different editions of this. And each edition has its own new take, which also almost is borrowing from the culture at large in which these teens are growing up. So if you read one of the original pamphlets, I'll put a screenshot here, about modesty and wearing, what you're allowed to wear, what you're not allowed to wear, it really explicitly says don't wear bikinis, don't wear, immodest things. And it speaks very specifically to what girls should wear, that kind of a thing. When I was growing up, I had this version of the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, and the verbiage changes. It doesn't mention bikinis expressly. It does say a few other things, which I'll get into in a bit. It's still, though, pretty specific about how modesty should look and what you should wear. Now we go forward in time a little bit to now. They've updated the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet again, and the verbiage is so much more vague and much more about following Jesus Christ and showing that the Savior, that you love him through your dress and appearance, and much more like a soft, follow the Spirit versus here's what you can wear, here's what you can't wear. So this evolution over time really impacts, I think, the way people view these rules, because I can very well get online and say, I don't look that old. It's not like I'm in my 80s or 90s. I was a youth, I'm 31 now, so I was a youth maybe 15 years ago. But often the experiences that I describe are wildly different from what people in the comments are saying they experience now. But then there are other comments of people saying, yeah, that's totally true. That's how it is in my family. So, I think region to region is different. If you live in Utah, if you live in New York, if you live in Argentina, it's all going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be colored by your culture that you're growing up in. It's probably also going to be colored by, the type of Mormon your parents are, by, the percentage of people around you who are Mormon, if you're the only one in your high school, if you're one of 500 in your high school. So these rules that I'm explaining, I would say almost no Mormons ever drink coffee. That's a pretty hard and fast rule. But some of the rules, like modesty, are a little bit more loosey-goosey, and it's a little bit harder to say, like, this is the absolute rule, because they've evolved it a lot over time. But then also within each congregation, it's going to be a little bit different depending on where you are and who you are. I also think when I say these are the rules, and I couldn't do this growing up, often I'll have people say, you can do whatever you want. But here's the thing with that argument. You can very well say, oh, well, no, no one's like forcing you to do any of these things. It's a choice. We have free agency. The choices, though, that they're presenting are, don't drink coffee, which shows you love God and you'll be able to be with your family in the celestial kingdom forever and for all eternity, or drink coffee and, go to the telestial kingdom, never see your family again, and God, you've shown God you don't love his commandments. So when those are kind of the two opposite sides of the choice, it's not like drink coffee or don't. It's your choice. You choose. What do you want to do? It's be damned or be saved. Those are the choices, right? I will also say I was talking to my mom about the changes in the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, and I said, why do you think that my mom is still very active in the church. I asked, why do you think they changed the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet? And she said, I think the church is just trying to be much more centered on Jesus Christ and try to teach people to make their own choices instead of relying so heavily on a strict list of rules that we follow without question. And my follow-up to that was, that sounds great. More personal autonomy. Do you think that means they're going to get rid of the rule that you can't drink coffee? And she was like, no. Just like, oh, that's ridiculous. They're never going to get rid of that rule. So, as much as I think that members are kind of like, oh, look at us, so progressive, having people rely on personal revelation over this long list of rules, when presented with another rule like coffee, they're like, oh, but that's different. That's fundamentally different, So I get where she's coming from. I do think it's good that they are stepping back from this very rigid set of rules, but I think that also ultimately at its core, the church is always going to be so heavily focused and obsessed with rule following. As I showed you in that video, it's not even about the rule. It's about staying 10 to 20 to 30 steps back from sin and being as pure as possible. Let's talk about dating and marriage. This is a doozy because there is so much conversation about how to date, when to date, who to marry, blah, blah, blah. So let's jump in. Let's start with dating, since that involves, coming up through this whole experience of, going from being a teenager to marriage to having children. So when I was growing up, dating before you were 16 was completely against the rules. And that is still the case. Let me read from the actual church handbook on the internet. It's, do not date until you are at least 16 years old. Dating before then can lead to immorality, limit the number of other young people you meet, and deprive you of experiences that will help you choose an eternal partner. So that was a big rule, and there was a lot of sneakiness because, I would say kids start wanting to date around 12. So I would have friends who would kind of try to sneak and almost, like in elementary school where you're dating, but you don't speak to each other. I think that's kind of common where it's like a lot of crushes, but nobody's fully going on dates. So prior to 16, it's very, against the rules to be dating, but I think some people kind of bend the rules. There's some holding hands, maybe kissing, but most people, like I didn't date anyone until I was 16. After you turn 16, you then have to only do group dates. Group dates are what are encouraged till you're 18. So similar to the same explanation there, if you pair off when you're 16, you're limiting the number of young people you meet, and they want you to kind of, I think, keep your options open. I also think it's about, if you're pairing off at 16, you could get into some hanky-panky, and they don't want that either. So group dates are what is expected. And I did kind of pair off before I was 18, but then when we would go on dates, I would always go with the same person, but often go on group dates. And that was kind of more of the expectation. We would hang out at that person's house when I was dating him and not go on dates. So I think that was kind of a way of skirting around this rule. We're not going on dates, we're hanging out. There's just the two of us. You know the rule, but you try to figure out ways to skirt around the rule. So we're not dating, we just hold hands, but we're not dating. Or we go on group dates, but we're always just with each other and we're paired off, but because we're on a group date, it's okay. So there's a lot of, I think, kind of mental gymnastics going on to kind of be able to do what you want to do, but still be following the rules. After you turn 18, it is open season, and then it's full speed ahead with trying to get married. I will say when boys turn 18, they're supposed to go and serve missions. So that's typically what men do first. As soon as they turn 18, they put in their mission papers and they go for the 2-year mission, which I've described on other channels. Girls are not as expected to go serve missions. A lot of my friends I had who went to BYU got married at 19, 20. I got married at 22, so I was kind of an old maid at that point, but it's very much seen as 18. Girls start dating returned missionaries, so 21, 22-year-olds. Guys go on their mission for 2 years. So that kind of is what changes in the dating, scene once everybody starts turning 18. I will say too, even before you're 16, at least for women, you hear and talk about your future eternal companion all the time. In church lessons, in, young women's meetings. I used to, I think for a while when I was writing my journal, I'd be writing my journal to my future spouse. In church meetings, young women's lessons, I would be encouraged to write letters to my future spouse. Dear future husband, I hope you're a returned missionary. I hope you love the Savior, Jesus Christ. I hope you're, a good priesthood holder. So what's funny is when I compare notes with my husband and I'm like, did you ever write letters to me like your future wife? And he's like, no. Apparently, the future companion thing is much more drilled into girls. And that's the same when I've talked to other men, too, who are ex-Mormon, hey, how much focus did you have growing up on your future companion? And the answer is always very little. So I do think girls, in the same way girls are much more primed for motherhood, are also much more primed for marriage and, making the celestial family, whereas men are taught a lot about, their priesthood power. They, have a lot more discussions about being a leader and that kind of a thing. So two separate experiences for boys and girls in the church. Part of that, of course, like I mentioned, is me being heavily encouraged to marry someone who was part of that, like I said, is me being heavily encouraged to marry a returned missionary, which is another way that they get you to serve a mission, because if a guy wants to marry a good Mormon girl, he's got to go on that 2-year sales mission for the church. If he wants to marry someone that his mommy is going to approve of, he has to go on that 2-year mission. That's just the optics of it. As a girl, I was told constantly, only marry a guy if he's a returned missionary. And so that really narrows the dating pool. And if you're a guy looking for a good Mormon girl, you'll just go on a mission. It's just kind of part, they'll even talk about it openly while I was on my mission. Guys would talk about how the more baptisms you get, the hotter your wife will be. So, it's almost like do your time, do your work in the field, get those baptisms in, and God will reward you with a beautiful young virgin. I will also say too, 2, marriage is very heavily put in the focus when you're dating after 18. So it's pretty common, marriage is kind of always on the table. You're told only date those who you see yourself marrying. So if you meet a guy who's really cool, but he swears or he didn't serve a mission, you shouldn't even go on a first date with him because he's not marriage material. So you're very much focused on, you're always thinking about marriage. Even if you're not thinking about marriage with this particular person specifically, you're thinking, is this person marriage material? And if they're not, you really shouldn't even go on a first date with them. When I was at BYU, I fully had men who started talking about marriage with me, who I went on maybe 2 or 3 dates with. And it was always kind of a turnoff because it feels so soon to be like, how many kids do you want? Or our kids will be so cute. Or, just really starting to lay it on thick about, hey, when we're married someday. I had a guy who said, I always dreamed that if I was dating a girl who wanted to serve a mission, that she would skip her mission for me because marriage is more of what a woman should be doing anyways. And because she loved me so much, he's basically insinuating because I had my mission call at that point and we were kind of dating, I hope that you decide to, skip your mission to marry me instead, which is the more righteous thing for you to do. Anyways, I did not. When you're dating, you're also very heavily encouraged to follow the law of chastity, which is not just, no sex before marriage. It is staying as far back from that waterfall as possible. The term that was used when I was growing up is no heavy necking or petting, which I had no idea what that meant. That is like the oldest man type of definition for making out or whatever that I've ever heard. But I do remember being quite mystified when people would say, well, the law of chastity is not just having no sex before marriage, but it's also avoiding heavy petting and avoiding necking. And maybe when I was like 12, I think eventually I figured out it's like making out and, touching each other on, chest or underneath. But I was so mystified by that. Let's finish watching that video from earlier because I think it does lay out pretty well, not just what the law of chastity is, no sex before marriage, but what else is expected of Mormon youth. And I'll say youth, but I'll also say anyone prior to getting married. So for example, even if 2 45-year-olds are dating each other, they are still expected to follow the same standard. So it's not like just 18-year-olds are told these things. This is the standard for anyone before they get married.
Before marriage, do not do anything to arouse the powerful emotions that must be expressed only in marriage. Only do things you would feel comfortable doing in the presence of your parents. For example, a 15-year-old could ask, is it okay for me to hold hands? But maybe the question should be, would I hold hands in front of my parents? You can set standards that will...
Another example that I was taught is only kiss another person in the same way you would be comfortable kissing them in front of your parents or in front of the Savior. So that's a pretty high bar to clear, and I think it also creates a lot of weirdness around the wedding night because when you first get married, you're kind of expected to go from hand holding and closed mouth kisses to having sex. And that is a huge acceleration. And not only that, but you're not taught anything about pleasure. You're not taught anything about even the other person's body. So it's really setting people up for completely like awful, horrible experiences on their wedding night because the two people are going to have no familiarity with the bodies of the other individual at all. They've never experienced that themselves. You're also completely not supposed to masturbate you're not supposed to masturbate ever, even after you're married. So, that is creating a world in which people don't understand their bodies. People don't understand the bodies of their partner. And then your wedding night, which is supposed to be like this beautiful, wonderful thing, is scary, intimidating, and for many people, awful. I think also the no masturbation rule really forces you to put your sexual experience on the other person. So, if you've never masturbated, if you don't know anything about your own body, you are expecting the other person to understand that about you and help you reach that, right? So it's, I think, very difficult when you're entering this world in which you've never been allowed to explore your own body or your own pleasure. and then now you're having sex and you're kind of expecting the other person to know more about your body than you do, and to bring your body more pleasure than you even know how to do for yourself. So that's another mismatch that I think is common, is that when you don't know your own body, how can you even help the other person help you feel pleasure? Like it's just it's like a black box, in my opinion. Pornography, I'll say, also is very taboo. You're never supposed to view it. I was taught not to just ask potential future husbands, to people I was dating, have you ever viewed pornography? I was told to ask, when did you last view pornography? Because you're really supposed to be responsible for sniffing out if someone that you might be considering marrying is a pornography addict. And pornography addict is a very much term coined by the Mormon Church, I think, or maybe just by religious traditionalism in general. The broader medical world does not say pornography addiction is a real thing. There's not, in the same way alcoholism has treatment centers across the country. There are really only pornography treatment centers and programs in Utah. I also think this is an instance that is exacerbated by the level of taboo placed upon it. Often, and I've met men or seen men post online who have shared this sentiment, that they thought they had a pornography addiction, that when they leave the church, that they are no longer obsessing over this and sweating over it and crying over it and feeling like they have to call their bishop every time that they have watched pornography to confess something, but that as soon as they leave this very rigid tradition, they suddenly can take a breath of fresh air, and that they're no longer addicted. They're no longer crying over over watching pornography. And maybe they step back their use. Maybe they're watching, once a week, every other week, whatever. But ultimately, watching pornography for the rest of the world is seen potentially as, not ideal. Certainly people try to say, okay, I'm going to not watch it this month. Certainly people say there are a lot of issues with the industry. I completely agree with all of that. I think watching with responsibility, watching people who are in charge of their own content, there's a lot of morality. There's a lot of moral questions around pornography, but I think saying, you're not worthy of marriage because you watched pornography once, that's what the Mormon Church is saying, right? You're not worthy of marriage, or maybe you are addicted to pornography because you viewed it 3 or 4 times and you need to go to your bishop and confess and describe exactly what you watched and what you did as you watched, and you should do that in a private interview one-on-one. I think a lot of people would say there's issues with pornography, there's issues with the porn industry in general. I don't think most people would say you deserve to be divorced if you've watched pornography 3 times in the last year. But that is kind of the messaging you receive as a Mormon. And so pornography itself, apart from masturbation, you should never masturbate, but also I think pornography is so heavily demonized. And as a Mormon woman, it really is kind of the boogeyman, where you're told, even if your spouse tells you they don't really watch porn, you shouldn't believe them, because they probably still do. You should trust us, the church, what we say about your husband or your future husband. You should trust us before you trust him. Even if he says he doesn't watch it, even if he said, I've watched it a few times, but I don't watch it anymore, he's lying. He's definitely still watching it, probably 3 times a day, and he's probably cheating on you. And that's the mindset I felt like I was in when I was in the church. I think that it's a very unhealthy mindset, and I think it destroys a lot of marriages, because if you've watched it 3 times in the last month, you're addicted to pornography. Most people don't define addiction as something you do a few times a week in private for 5 minutes. Usually addiction is something that's incredibly hazardous to your health, makes you lose your job. Like people who are alcoholics, they can't hold a job because they are drinking so much. People who are addicted to heroin can't maintain normal human relationships. Mormon men who are addicted to pornography, this is the type of use typically that is watching a few times a week and doing it in private, and it like almost you couldn't even tell they're doing it unless you really heavily are watching their search history. That's not addiction. For something to clear the hurdle of the term addiction, at least medically, Pornography just doesn't do it. You will not find pornography addiction used in medical terminology. You'll really only see it used in religious terminology. And when it's described as an addiction, though, it does have this power, this almost sway over the minds of people that it feels so much more severe than it truly is. And then you're also dealing with all the guilt and shame of, anytime you have masturbated, but also you've been told for so long that what you're doing on your wedding night and thereafter is dirty, bad, evil. Even though you can flip the switch and say, well, now I'm married, so it's okay. It doesn't mean all that programming is just going to disappear overnight. You've been so trained to see sex as the sin next to murder. That's what Mormons call it, that once you get married, it doesn't mean that goes away. You still feel like anything to do with pleasure or your body or sexuality is kind of very sinful, and that doesn't disappear overnight. And I think it really sets people on the path to having a lot of shame, a lot of miscommunication, and a lot of difficulties. No discussion, of course, of this topic would be complete about marriage and chastity without talking about gay marriage, and really anything to do with the spectrum of gender, non-binary people, trans people. All of that is basically off limits. The church doesn't even really talk about trans people. At least it didn't when I was growing up. Maybe now they do, because it's becoming more front and center in like the national conversation. I also never heard the word or term non-binary as a Mormon. I only was more familiar with gay and lesbian. And so some of these things almost are so unknown to this religious tradition that there's not even a conversation about it, that the words aren't even used. Gay isn't even, when I was growing up, the word gay even wasn't even really used. They use the term same-sex attraction. So it's not an identity. They want to really step back from this idea that being gay or being lesbian or any of these identities are identities. They almost want to reframe it as like an emotion, same-sex attraction. This is a sinful thought I experience. I'm attracted to the same sex, almost like a passing almost like something that comes and goes and passes and you struggle with, versus something that you just are. In the same way that hetero people are hetero. You don't say that hetero people have opposite sex attraction. You just say they're straight, right? So straight people get to have identities, but I think the church really tries to strip that away from anyone who's gay by calling it same-sex attraction. To this point, gay marriage is still not allowed in the church. It's not allowed in the temple, but it's not allowed in a chapel either. If there's two young people who have sex before marriage, they can still get married in a Mormon church. They just can't get married in the temple for time and all eternity. So straight people, even if they've had sex before marriage, are still welcomed into the chapel to have a union, right? Gay people not married in the temple, they're also not be allowed to be married in the church. Their marriage is not recognized at all. If you're already married and you walk in and you say, I'd like to get baptized, that marriage is not going to be recognized under the religious hierarchy. And there is a ton of rhetoric in the church about why being gay is bad and a sin, still to this day. I do hope that they change that. I hope that they pivot. As I've said, they've pivoted all these other things. They do often seem to pivot, in my opinion, when something becomes so unpopular. For example, the United States would not allow Utah to join the union until they vowed to get rid of polygamy. And so they got rid of polygamy. Black people were not permitted to enter the temple or have priesthood, which is like a Mormon power, the power of God. And then they had a lawsuit by the ACLU, and then they changed the doctrine, right? So they do have a history, in my opinion, of changing doctrines whenever it becomes too inconvenient to persist in that path. And I think as time goes on, that will be the case for the stance on gay marriage and anything else to do with the LGBTQ community. All of those things, I think, at some point, I hope, will become accepted. And hopefully, as that happens, there will be a lot less homophobia within the church. I had a student who was kind of mercilessly teased for being gay, who did try to kill himself, and his parents removed him from the school. So I firsthand have seen gay kids get very heavily harassed. I don't even know if that kid was gay. Certainly Certainly he never told me. I just know that the kids made fun of him for it, and it made him obviously very miserable. So I think hopefully too, along with making gay marriage okay, I hope that the church continues to try to push very, very hard to be accepting, especially of young people who can't escape their families, who have to go to church every Sunday and hear these homophobic remarks. I think it's one of the worst aspects of the church, is what it does to people who are in that community and how it makes them feel. Just a reminder to like this video. Please comment below if you have any questions about the rules I've said so far. Comment if you have a rule that you followed as a Mormon that bothered you, that was so inane, and yet you still followed it because you thought it was the will of God. If you're someone who's recovering from Mormonism, I suggest potentially trying out my book. I wrote this, released it in January. It's How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. I am currently working on the audiobook. It is available on Amazon in hardcover and Kindle paperback. So you can get, different options for whatever you like reading from the most. If you've heard of the CES letter, it's by Jeremy Runnels, and it is a PDF. I'll put it in the notes below, a PDF that's basically a record of all of the reasons why Mormonism. It's essentially a document that deconstructs Mormonism line by line. It talks about early church history, polygamy. It talks about the translation of the Book of Mormon. And it's kind of the number one resource I think people point to as what helped them start to deconstruct and understand the truth about what Mormonism is. So very well worth the read if you want to learn about all the reasons why Mormonism isn't true. But he recently reviewed this book, and I'm going to read his review now. He said, How to Leave the Mormon Church is a book that was needed for years. It was a book that I wanted to write and tried to write, but thankfully I don't have to write. Alyssa did an amazing job with this guide that will help so many folks to navigate what can often be a turbulent process and journey. Use the guardrails that Alyssa set up for you, and you'll be safely on your way. So thank you to Jeremy for leaving me that review. And if you are recovering from Mormonism, please consider picking up a copy. It also, maybe 30% of it or so is my personal story. So if you want to hear more about my experience leaving the church, it's also worth a read for that too. Well, I will also say that one of the cornerstones of Mormonism is the idea of continuing revelation. So anything that the current prophet says can discount things that previous prophets said. So essentially, this is saying that God is continuing to reveal his true church. He is continuing to sanctify and strengthen the saints. He is continuing to restore the full gospel on the earth today. So when Joseph Smith came back, he restored Christ's original church, but he didn't, restore everything about it, because that's why each prophet can restore even more of the true gospel of Jesus Christ to the saints. So this gives them such a great excuse to be able to change a lot of these things and call it continuing revelation. So it's not, we were wrong in the past and now here's the right thing. It's, we didn't have the full revealed truth, and now we have more revealed truth. And isn't that something to celebrate? However, it can often feel like a slap in the face to those of us who took all of these guidelines and rules very seriously. For example, imagine you are a Black person prior to the 1970s. You believe that it is God's doctrine, because that's what the Mormon prophets say, God's doctrine that Black people cannot be sealed with their families in the temple. Suddenly, the rule changes and God changes his mind and says, hey, you guys can do that now. You can get married in the temple. But with no explanation, no apology, no backing behind why this change was made, besides the fact that the saints were ready. Is it, some people say, isn't that cause to celebrate that Jesus is saying the saints are ready for this new rule and he's revealing more of the restored gospel? But think of all of those people prior to the 1970s who lived and died under the belief that within this church, Black people should not be in full fellowship according to God. That is such a slap in the face. And it is not, all of these women who came before me, who thought all of these things about being a mother, not seeking employment, how many children you're supposed to have, what you're supposed to wear for clothing. And then suddenly they change the rule to be, do whatever you feel like. That's a slap in the face to those women who very righteously tried to do what was right, sometimes at great personal cost, only to have the church say, oh, never mind. It actually isn't that important. We're changing the rule. So did the rule never matter? Because it feels like the rule really mattered at one point. And now you change it and there's no apology, no explanation. It's just, hey, shouldn't we all be happy and celebratory that Jesus is revealing more of his gospel to the saints? No, I think it's a very calculated pivot to help the church stay mainstream and to offend as few people as possible and to avoid legal, and to avoid legal disputes with different people. So it's continuing revelation really bothers me just because it is such an excuse to change the rules and say, oh, it's because God revealed it, and never have to apologize for the damage done by the previous laws. Let's jump into the modesty standards for both men and women in the Mormon Church. First, most Mormon adults who are fully active are expected to wear religious underwear called garments. These cover the sleeve, and they are supposed to go down to the knee. So this is almost a forcing function of modesty. The reason for the garment is to remind you of the promises you made in the temple, but a secondary reason for the garment, in my opinion, and expressly stated in some areas of Mormon doctrine, is for the express purpose of modesty. Garments are considered sacred. You're told actually to never even leave them on the ground, and you're supposed to wear them morning and night, except for when you are having sex, sleeping, or showering. And they just released a little press release saying that people, specifically women, were not wearing their garments enough and almost, chastising people for not, following through with the covenants they made in the temple. So they do take the religious underwear very seriously. And if you need a church to tell you what underwear to wear, you might be in a cult. Just a consideration for you. I wore garments for about 4 years and they were really uncomfortable. And you're also told not to alter your clothing or alter your dress for special occasions. So even prior to wearing garments, you're still supposed to always wear, tank tops are considered inappropriate, and you're supposed to wear clothing that goes to the knee. This is a photo of me at prom. Prom was always so much drama in, the Mormon community because most prom dresses have, like a tube top or spaghetti sleeves or whatever. Most prom dresses don't have full sleeves. So finding a prom dress that works with your modesty standards is very challenging. For me, when I was going to prom, both my, every time I went to prom, I would always have this little shrug thing that I would keep on the entire night, even when I was dancing, that would completely cover my shoulders. Growing up, bikinis were also a huge conversation. Even tankinis that show, a little bit of the tummy, completely off limits. I had experiences where girls would go to a girls' camp, which is a summer camp for Mormon girls, or youth activities, and they'd have a bathing suit that was too revealing, and their parents would have to come bring them a different bathing suit, or they would have to wear a shirt over their bathing suit. And so anything to do with water sports is really heavily regulated as far as modesty goes. I didn't wear my first bikini till I think I was 27, 26. Even after I left, I still kind of mentally had a hard time just committing to wearing a bikini. And I'll say too, if you never wear a bikini, that's totally fine. I think, but for me, I wanted to wear one. I just really had been taught that my body was a sin and that my body was sinful and sexual and that I shouldn't be comfortable in my own skin in a bikini. If you don't wear a bikini because you don't like it and it makes you uncomfortable, that's one thing. Good for you. More power to you. If you don't wear a bikini because you think your body is too sexual and you shouldn't be comfortable in your own skin and God doesn't want you to show your body, that's really totally based in shame. And that to me is much different than a conscious choice you are making totally for yourself of whether you want to wear a bikini or not, or whatever swimwear you choose, whatever clothing you choose. Wear whatever you want if that's what you want. But if you're wearing something based off of shame, that's pretty different in my opinion. And I think a lot of the clothing I chose was based in the shame I felt surrounding my body. And even after I left, it took me a long time to get over that shame to the point that I was ready to wear clothing and swimwear or whatever that I felt empowered by and that I really enjoyed wearing. There's actually a term used in Mormonism, or maybe it's just an ex-Mormonism, I don't know, but bare shoulders are called porn shoulders. So on the ex-Mormon subreddit, you'll often see people posting, I just left the church and I've got my porn shoulders out. And I think for a lot of women specifically, but I think for men too, wearing a tank top for the first time is one of those, it's like drinking coffee for the first time. It's one of those liberating, scary experiences where you feel like even though you're doing something that you've seen other people do, non-Mormons do your whole life, for you to do it feels like breaking this massive rule that you've held up as the standard for excellence for your entire life. So I've got my porn shoulders out for today's video, and I always thought that little term was kind of a funny and cute way of almost giving the middle finger to this modesty standard, which is so extreme and ridiculous and deserves to be made fun of a little bit. Along with modesty standards, there are standards around body modifications like tattoos and piercings. So after I left, I got my nose ring. I have, I don't have piercings in right now, but I got some other piercings in my ears, and then I got a few tattoos. I have one for my husband. I have one for my son. And then I've been meaning to get one for my other son. It's on my to-do list. So tattoos are very discouraged. They were expressly discouraged when I was growing up in my version of the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. They, in the new pamphlet, have stepped away from that terminology. Now it's kind of presented as more of a gray area. I'll put the links to the newer version and the older versions below so that if you want, you can, just control find and look at the different sections and see how they compare and how they've changed over time. For the rest of this section about modesty, I'm going to break it into male expectations and female expectations. I think it's easier, at least for me, to focus on the female expectations for women. I am a woman. That's what I grew up with. But I do think that men have their own set of rules and expectations that sometimes I don't think about as much just because I didn't grow up as a guy. Women are definitely encouraged to be really feminine, to have their hair long, to wear makeup. And I wanted to include this video, but this was a Mormon apostle giving a speech. And in the speech, he decided to start addressing women specifically. So let's hear what this apostle from God has to say to women.
You beautiful girls, don't wander around looking like men. Put on a little lipstick now and then and look a little charming.
Put on a little lipstick now and then and look charming, ladies. Because every woman wants an old man to tell them to put on lipstick. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear from the mouth of an apostle of God to me as the sacred message that you've come to deliver. So along with being encouraged to look beautiful, wear a lot of makeup, whatever, wear a lot of makeup, but not too much makeup. Growing up, I was also very much instructed in how, the making of a home, how to bake, how to sew by hand, how to sew using machine. A lot of these traditional trad wife type of things that you're supposed to know how to do to be a good feminine Mormon woman. I also think if you look at influencers who become very popular out of Utah who are Mormon, and just kind of the Mormon aesthetic in general, as much as they say, this is a worldwide church and everyone's welcome and we love all people. I do feel like, especially within Utah Mormonism, there is a very high value placed on blonde hair, blue eyes, thin, big boobs, that look is very much, all of the most famous Mormon influencers have cultivated that look quite well. I also look very Mormon. I know as I say that I have blonde hair, I have blue eyes. So, and maybe that's, I think, a part of why I wanted to get the nose ring, why I wanted to get, more visible tattoos, because I don't like that I look so Mormon. And to counteract that a bit, I had to, weigh the scales in my favor a little bit more. I also think being white is seen as more desirable. I mean, they talk about white being holy. Also in the Book of Mormon, there's a verse which I'll put here about how people who are sinful are cursed with a skin of blackness. And even though in the modern church, they no longer teach anything about race, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young taught that blackness was a curse from God because of Cain and Abel. And they also taught some of the early black members who wanted to join the church that in the afterlife, their skin would turn white. And so as much as those things aren't taught from the pulpit anymore, they are certainly, I think, in some of the subtext of the culture of the church. I also think, the church heavily opposed the civil rights movement. And so I think whiteness, being white in general, is seen as the superior race in many ways, even though that's no longer explicitly taught. I think it's so baked into the history of the church that, President Nelson, the current prophet, was born in the 1920s. He was a full adult when the church was actively campaigning against the civil rights movement. You're not going to find any clip of him saying, hey, I think that we should allow equal rights, during the civil rights movement. He was an adult. There's no record of him saying anything like that, though. So you won't find evidence of him ever in his history speaking out against the church, because he wouldn't be prophet if he had done that. So I really think that as much as, I might say this and people will probably disagree in the comments, I do feel like whiteness, being white, is seen as better in the church. I think if you look at, the current list of who is in leadership of the church, it's mostly white. And so this idea that whiteness is better has been the standard for so long. I don't think the church can just escape it, which intros me into talking more about men. I wanted to share a portion of my book that was actually written. It was written by one of my friends. His name is Levi. And he wrote a little bit about what it was like for him growing up in the church, specifically in Utah, not being white, and what that was like. The church places far fewer restrictions on men, but we're still taught that we represent the Savior. This comes with a strict style guide. If your Sunday shirt isn't white, you can't bless the sacrament. Leaders can't wear bow ties, no earrings, no tattoos. Avoid the appearance of evil. A hot chocolate in a Starbucks cup is as bad as coffee. This constant focus on appearance and what others think can fuck anyone up. I grew up in Utah, where most Mormon boys have straight blonde hair, a smooth white face, and slender builds ideal for running. I have dark curly hair and a face speckled with freckles and a naturally stocky body, gifts from my dad's Scottish ancestry and my mom's Polynesian roots. In elementary school, I remember looking at my friends' skinny ankles. Their socks stretched around their Achilles tendon, leaving gaps on either side. They looked spry and agile. My ankles filled my socks like a cupcake in its liner. Their calves were slender. Mine were thick and beefy. I wondered if more girls would like me if I looked like the other boys. I felt ashamed of my body and wanted to cover my legs. From ages 11 to 27, I did not wear shorts. I avoided pool parties. Our apartment complex had a very nice community pool during my senior year of high school. I never used it. Reminders of my differences weren't always from inside my head. As a 17-year-old priest, the bishop emphasized my distinctive curly hair by comparing me to animals in front of the other boys: alpaca, llama, poodle, sheep. Later, I found out that one of the other boys straightened his hair every morning. 10 years later, I left the church. I no longer believe I have to represent the Son of God or look like the typical example of a good Mormon boy. I felt more empowered to love myself for my differences. At 28 years old, and with much love and encouragement from my wife, I felt more secure than ever and bought my first pair of shorts as an adult. I chose a pair of bright red, extra short Adidas. It was my way of plunging into the deep end. Now I believe my wife when she says she loves my curly hair, thick legs, and broad build. People ask what my leg workout is. Girls use brow pens to draw faux freckles. K-pop stars get perms to have curly hair. So many of my differences are normal or desired when you look outside of the church. I don't need to look or dress like one of the 90-year-old apostles or their most dedicated followers to be a good person. I don't need to have runner's legs to be strong or straight hair to be handsome. I've stopped wondering if Moroni's command to be perfect means I should look more like somebody else. I only need to be enough for myself, and I am. Thank you to Levi for writing that story, because I think as a girl, growing up in the church, I was so focused on modesty, but I think that really adds another perspective. He's not even talking about covering skin. He's talking about the color of his skin, the texture of his hair, the build of his body, how even those things, because they weren't up to this, Mormon norm of whiteness, of thinness, he also felt very othered, even his bishop calling him those awful, horrible names. So I think even though women, it's more focused on purity, men have a standard too. Along with what he shared, men are supposed to wear shorts down to the knee. They have a specific haircut, which I'll put a picture of here, a specific haircut that the sideburns are supposed to be a certain way, supposed to be cut fairly short to the scalp. And so the hair is almost like a businessman from the 50s look, I want to say. Beards are discouraged, and a lot of men, when they become bishops, they end up shaving their beard. Men at BYU are not permitted to have beards. Mustaches are a gray area. Some men do have mustaches, but they're still supposed to be pretty traditional mustaches, none of the crazy mustache wax where you're curl, still very standard and traditional look if you go for the mustache look. He mentioned too in his story the white shirt. Men are very much expected to wear white shirts at church. This is a very particular rule, and it's one way that it's always so easy to tell if someone's a non-member or a less active member at church, because even if a man shows up in a cream shirt or a light blue shirt that's collared and pressed and looks very professional and would be welcome in any professional environment, you can just tell that that guy is not really Mormon, because all the Mormons always wear white shirts. So there's all these little tiny rules that you're expected to follow, even rolling up the sleeves, like I said, or wearing a cream instead of a white shirt. All of those things are going to make it clear you're not living up to the standard of Jesus Christ when you're at church. I wanted to take a moment to address the mindset that a lot of people have shared around Mormon values, which are, even if the religion is a little kooky, these people are living really well, or really they have great values. This, I think, comment is very much pointing to Mormons have this traditional trad wife, whatever you want to call it, this traditional experience that is in many ways seen as good. Not drinking alcohol, seen as good, having a big family, not many people are getting married now. Mormons are still getting married, not having, a lot of millennials aren't having kids. Mormons still having kids. So a lot of people kind of hold up this Mormon lifestyle and say, whether you believe or not, they're making it look pretty good over there. I do think that's a fairly common almost retort to when I criticize the church, which is that, they look like they're happy. They look like their life is good. So what's the big deal? And I would say, fair enough, but imagine growing up being gay in that community. Is it good for them? Imagine growing up being anything other than skinny and white. Is that good for them? Imagine being a woman who's told all you'll ever be is a baby machine, and your husband is the one that gets to have monetary power over the household. Is it good for the woman? So I think it's very easy to say, oh, they look so good from the outside. But if you insert anything into that community that is not up to snuff, that actually makes people unhappy. It makes people sometimes suicidal. It makes people feel very othered. And it creates a system in which, if you are trying to just drink your morning cup of coffee, you are on the out group and you are not going to be fully fellowshipped into that community. And so as much as it might look like, oh, they have all of these traditional values, that's great. Well, is it that great if it only works for some of the people some of the time, and then the rest of the people are put on the outskirts of the community, they're othered, they're looked down upon, and they're judged? Potentially the reason they look so good is that they've also systematically gotten rid of anyone that doesn't fit the perfect Mormon mold, in my opinion. And so I see what people are saying with that argument, but I also think if you dig a little deeper and try to find the people who aren't perfectly fitting the mold and see their experiences and see how they are with their mental health and how they fit into the community, I don't think you're going to find people who are just so completely blissfully happy. I think you'll find people who are happy when every condition in their life is making it so Mormonism is working for them. But if you're a single mom, if you are a Black kid, if you are a gay kid, if you are a woman who doesn't want to have children but wants to have a career, all of these people, all of these groups are not going to seamlessly fit in Mormon culture and even doctrinally in the Mormon belief system. So that's my response. In the rest of the video, I'm going to cover food storage, the rule that you should pay tithing, more general religious expectations, and then a little bit about other smaller rules like Sabbath day observance, no gambling, that kind of thing. So I'll go a little bit more quickly because I think some of these rules require less context than something like modesty or dating within the church. So food storage, the rule around food storage is you're supposed to have 6 months to a year supply, though they say if you don't have any food storage, you should start by just having like 2 weeks supply. The purpose of food storage is to prepare for the second coming because Mormons believe no man knoweth the hour of the second coming. And so when I was growing up, we had our pantry, but then separate from our pantry, we had an entire room in our basement just dedicated to huge tubs of food storage. And so this is primarily so that if, you know, shit hits the fan and it's the second coming and wars of rumors of wars. Basically, Mormons believe that before Jesus Christ comes again, there's going to be a lot of bad things happening. And so the food storage is what you need in order to prepare to get through the emergencies that will come as a result of the impending second coming. So that's why you have your food supply. As part of this, I also learned other forms of emergency preparedness. We always had barrels of water. We also had, I learned how to start a fire with flint, I also learned how to tie certain knots. I also learned how to set up a tent. So in girls' camp and then also just at other times within my family unit, we had lots of different conversations about what will we do if there's an emergency? What will we do if there's a fire? And I don't think that's the worst advice. I think the pandemic, showed that the grocery store can very quickly completely empty out and there's no food. What are you going to do? I just think that basing that off of this apocalyptic Jesus coming again thing is very scary for a kid to have to face. So I don't think it's the worst strategy to be prepared for an emergency. Seems like a good idea, but when you're telling your child, a bunch of people are going to be killed because Jesus will come again, and we need to do this because it's going to be the literal apocalypse before Jesus visits the earth, that's a little scary for a little kid to have to process. Another rule is that you should give 10% of your income to the Mormon church. I was always taught by my mom that should be your gross income, not your net. So your gross is what you earn before taxes. So I learned that, the Lord should get your money before the government does. So you should pay 10% tithing on your gross salary. So that's a lot of money over a lifetime, and I think a lot of people struggle financially with that because imagine if you just put that 10% in a retirement fund. That is a lot of money. And I will say too, as a kid, I was trained to pay my tithing since I got, my first dollar. I would have little envelopes set up that my mom, it wasn't the worst thing to learn financial independence. She would teach us if you get money, you should have an envelope for tithing, an envelope for personal savings. You should have an envelope for maybe something you want to save up for, like a shirt or, something bigger like your car someday. That's probably pretty good advice, kind of a Dave Ramsey approach to saving your money. But I really was taught from a very young age that I should be paying, if I would get $10 in an envelope for my grandparents for my birthday money, I would have $1 of that go to tithing. And the crazy part of this is when you're tithing off of money that's already been tithed. So if my parents, they pay tithing, right? If they then give me money as a Mormon kid, I pay tithing on it again. So the church is not just getting my parents' tithing, Then when they give it to me, my parents want to teach me tithing. So I'm giving tithing off of money that's already been tithed. Oh, that's crazy. So the church really does teach tithing from a very young age. The Mormon church has $100 billion plus dollars, which is a massive war chest of money and makes them one of the wealthiest churches in the world. And that is, I think, in large part because of tithing, but they also have so many other ways that they get money out of people. You know, you're asked also to give fast offerings, which is an additional donation once a month that goes into the bishop's storehouse. That's supposed to be meant like as an additional donation towards your local congregation. You're also asked to pay for your mission, your Mormon mission. As a Mormon missionary, I probably paid about $12,000 towards my Mormon mission. My parents helped some too with that expense. You know, think of having that toward your college. Think of using that to start a business. Instead, you're just paying that to the church to then do labor for the church. You're paying to do service for the church. I also saw, this was a screenshotted comment that I had on one of my videos on TikTok. This person says, I worked at a popular store for missionary clothes, and a family came in once while the son and mom were shopping. The grandma came to me and started sobbing as quietly as she could about how much the mission was costing. She wasn't a member, but her son's family was, and she said that they were putting themselves in serious financial danger to send him on a mission. She didn't know until he got a mission call that the families had to pay for the mission. So, I mean, in addition to fast offerings, in addition to tithing, you're also paying to send, if you have a big Mormon family, that's maybe 5 kids. For boys, it's, I think, $15,000, $16,000. So for each of your kids, you're having to put aside, basically the cost of a car to send them on a mission. And the church really doesn't often help with that cost. Usually the families are expected to fund the entirety themselves. So that's another way that they kind of get money, is they get free labor, and then the labor pays for the privilege of doing the labor. They also have different charity events. If you want to buy food storage, like I mentioned before, the church has a huge amount of food storage for sale. So they kind of create this ask of the members, hey, make sure you have 1 year food storage. Also, by the way, we sell food storage. So that's another way that they're kind of creating a problem and then selling you the solution. They also have Deseret Industries, specifically in Utah, but they have them other places too. This is essentially a Goodwill replacement. So you can go and purchase, people donate their items and then you can go purchase them from Deseret Industries. So that's another way that they are making, income. Another thing is that when you are a Mormon, you have a lot of callings. So like you might be you might be a bishop. You might be a Relief Society president. You may watch the children during Sunday service. So there's a lot of different responsibilities, right, as part of running a church. All of those things are called callings in Mormonism, and those are all done completely for free. So there's no payment. The only people who are paid are very high-level employees of the church, like the 12 apostles and the Quorum of the 70s. But the low-level congregation, those people are not paid. And so when you have something associated with your calling, so say I am in charge of teaching the 5-year-olds and I would like to make the lesson special by bringing some construction paper and markers, and I want to bring them some cookies or some treats at the end. All of those things are likely going to be paid for by me. You can expense it, but the process for expensing these things is pretty time consuming, and it takes a while to get your money. And it's almost seen as like, here's another little donation I can do for my church. So I would say they do have a way to get reimbursed, but in my experience of being in the church for 2 decades, I saw most people pay for those things out of their own paycheck with their own money. They're not going to the church to try to get the money back for this expense. You also are required to purchase garments. So when you wear garments, these are your daily underwear. I maybe would at any time have 10 sets, 15 sets. You have to make it through the week for laundry, potentially for working out. So, and each set is maybe $5 to $10. So, and that's underwear you're buying for your entire life. So that's that's over time, a fairly large expense. And every adult member is buying 5 to 10 to 20 sets, whatever they need a year, because as they run out, you have to buy more. So that is another revenue stream that the church uses to amass this $100+ billion fund that they then invest in Apple stock. They also have Deseret Book. Deseret Book is a place where you can buy, books, but also clothing, scripture cases. You can buy the temple clothes there. You could buy art. You can buy figurines. Anything you could ever want, you can buy at Deseret Book. They have a whole catalog. And so that is another revenue stream for the church. They also have BYU, the church-sponsored university, where you can pay, you pay tuition to go there. It is discounted for members, but when you consider the fact that your parents have been paying 10% of their income their whole life, I don't know if that's truly a discount. And so being heavily encouraged as a young person to go to BYU. So think, if you're a parent of 5 Mormon kids, you're paying for them to serve a mission. That money goes back to the church. You're paying for them to go to a Mormon church-sponsored university. That money goes back to the church. So much of and that's not even the 10% tithe, right? So much of your income, your underwear even, is being wrapped up into sending it to the Mormon church. I will say too, the Mormon church somewhat recently, was in hot water for building a mall with some of this money. They said that they use the interest. So this is like the crazy loophole. They said they use the interest off the tithing to fund the mall. So they're saying it's not technically tithe payer funds, because these tithe payer funds spit out interest, and the interest is what was used to build the mall. So they can use this kind of technicality to say, well, we didn't use the original nest egg. We used the interest the nest egg generated to build the mall, which is just so hilarious to me. And like the gymnastics there are, truly top notch for the Mormon church to be able to say, like, that's why we should not be held accountable for using tithe payer funds to build a literal mall. But they are also having some lawsuits because people are saying that that's not true. And ultimately, there is no public accounting of what the church uses these funds for. When you donate tithing, there is a little phrase at the bottom that essentially says that when you pay tithing, all of the money you send to the church becomes the sole property of the Mormon church. And so sorry, but if you don't like how we used it, it's our property as soon as you donate it. No returns allowed. And also all of this money is tax-free. So that's another reason they've been able to amass this huge amount of wealth, is that the American government does not take a single dime in taxes from anything that is given to a church. A few other rules I wanted to mention are more about the general religious expectations. These are not maybe personal autonomy type rules. These are the rules that you're expected to do as part of your membership within the church, and all things I did. Year one is have an active calling. So you should always have some sort of active responsibility within the congregation. This is something you do for free. You're only allowed to attend your own congregation, which is kind of crazy. So if you say you go to your ward, that's what a congregation is called. Say you go to your ward and you don't like the people there, or you're not jiving with the bishop, you're not allowed to just say like, oh, down the street, there's another ward or congregation that I like more, and some of my old friends are there, so I want to go to that one. Or if your kids, say your kids have become best friends with a congregation that's, maybe across the town, you cannot go with and have your kids be with their friends. You have to go to the geographic region you were assigned to, basically by your address. So that's one of the other religious expectations. You have to go to your own congregation. It's an expectation that members clean their church building. So it used to be that the church would use some of their massive amount of money to hire people to professionally clean the church. So now the members are expected to sign up on a little list and take some of their Saturday to go and clean the church building. And that is just one time suck of Mormonism. You have your Sunday service, but you also have your Wednesday youth activities. You have early morning seminary, Monday through Friday. You have temple trips. You have cleaning the church building and other small responsibilities. You might be asked to help someone move and pack their stuff and put in a moving van. Visiting, teaching, and visiting teaching and home teaching, which has now been rebranded as ministering. So these are all just, countless ways that Mormonism is asking not just your money, but your time as well. And it is so time intensive to be Mormon. And I think it really contributes to this echo chamber that Mormonism is, because you're almost caught up in this constant, like, go to church, go to church, go to church, go to church. And it really makes it so that your entire social circle is connected to the church. And if you are going to leave, you're going to be giving up this social circle that you've invested thousands of hours of time into. And that's another reason why leaving is so scary, is that the time demands of Mormonism are so high and so significant that leaving is essentially like walking out of the community, the only community you've really invested a lot of time in for your whole life. Another requirement is to sustain your local bishop. So if your bishop, whoever they are, you're supposed to say, I believe what he's saying, I'm following him. You also are required to go to tithing settlement. So like I said, the 10%, once a year, you're supposed to go and talk to your bishop and essentially certify that you've paid a full tithe and sign a document. You actually sign a document saying you've paid a full tithing. This is not a legal document. This is like an agreement between you and the church. It's not like that's legally binding, but I think when you're doing it, it feels very solemn and very serious. You're supposed to do genealogy. So you're supposed to learn about your ancestors. You're supposed to take those names and do things like baptisms for the dead. I'll put the video link below if you want to watch about baptisms for the dead and other temple ordinances. You're supposed to do those names in proxy. If you have ancestors, obviously, who were married, you're supposed to go do a temple sealing for them by proxy. So you're supposed to do your temple work and your genealogy. You should read church magazines. When I was growing up, there's something called The Friend. And as an adult, you read The Ensign. So there's all of these additional documents or magazines and books you're supposed to kind of keep up on. You should be writing in your journal daily. You should be doing visiting teaching, which I mentioned earlier, which is having someone in your ward that you're assigned to go visit in their home, read scriptures with, pray with, check up on. That's kind of meant to create a closer network within the ward, but is also very time intensive. You should participate in regular worthiness interviews. So this is where you meet with your bishop. He potentially gives you your temple recommend. He asks if you're staying worthy. He asks about if you're living the law of chastity, if you're following the word of wisdom. You're supposed to another funny rule is sharing your testimony on social media. So this means, that you are going onto social media, you are, sharing a scripture, you're sharing a picture of the Savior, you're typing out whatever it is, your testimony. So that's another aspect. You're really encouraged to be Mormon online and say you're Mormon and share your testimony to try to do as much missionary work as possible. I will say I wanted to end by talking a little bit about the rules around Sunday, Sabbath, the Sabbath day worship. It is impossible within a video of this length to discuss every single rule that Mormons are held accountable to or that culturally Mormons are expected to follow. So I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. I tried to put in as many as I could. If you want the complete list, you can click on the link in the description below. As far as Sabbath day observance, you are heavily discouraged from shopping on Sunday. You should go to all church meetings. You're not really supposed to see your friends necessarily. So there might be some sort of like a ward activity, like they called them linger longers, where they have a little bit of snacks and you're supposed to just like mix and mingle with the people around you. But growing up, I was not allowed to schedule, play dates or hangouts on Sunday with my non-Mormon friends. You're not really supposed to work or labor on Sunday. Sometimes people have jobs that require them to work on Sunday, and that's kind of looked down upon, but you won't necessarily get in trouble. You're not supposed to do sports on Sunday. So growing up, I really loved gymnastics. And when I got to a certain level, they wanted me to start coming a little bit more. And I was really excited to be invited to go to the next level. But this level had practice on Sundays. So I ended up deciding not to do it. because I felt like it was disobedient to the laws of God. So no working on Sunday, no sports on Sunday. And that really is challenging growing up, I think, because there's a lot of stuff that happens on Sunday that you're just not allowed to do because God doesn't want you to. The best Mormon families, I feel like, held the standard of wearing church clothes all day. My mom wanted us to do that, but it was always kind of hard to get us to do that because church clothes, dresses, shirts and ties are very uncomfortable. Once a month, you have something called Fast Sunday. That's where you don't eat for 24 hours or 2 meals, depending. That was always really hard for me because I feel like I would just eat and then would metabolize food really quickly and then get so hungry. And I felt so sinful for wanting, sometimes I would sneak little bites of things and I would have a lot of guilt about that. So starting at 8 years old, you're supposed to start fasting. And especially when I was really young, it was so hard on me. And I would just break into tears sometimes because I'd be so hungry. But you're supposed to go basically have a big meal on Saturday night and then not eat until after church dinner the next day. So that's a really long time for an 8-year-old to not eat. And even as an adult, it was, I did not like Fast Sunday because I always got so hungry by the end there. If you think of a rule that I forgot and you are a Mormon or an ex-Mormon, please feel free to drop it in the comments below. Next week, my goal is to have a video sharing the how Mormonism got started, the story of Joseph Smith, the story of the Book of Mormon, and kind of just lay out, how it all really began. So like this video, subscribe if you want to see that video. Drop a comment if you enjoyed, if you found anything I shared today to be interesting, and I will see you next week.